Hello, everybody, and it is time to break down yet another UFC card. And this one's actually pretty good. Now, there is there is one fight that I'll be getting to very, very early that does sort of ruin this card. That is the Chris Weidman Bruno Silva fight. I think, if I'm being honest, the reasons that fight does actually somewhat ruin the card should be kind of obvious. It's just so sad. It's so very sad. But we have a lot of stuff that really makes for a really good card here. I mean, this is a travel card. We're going to Atlantic City, New Jersey. You've got Fiorot, Aaron Blanchfield, a number one contenders fight in the main event slot. That's dope. Vincente Luque versus Joaquin Buckley. I have probably more of a hang up on that fight than most people. But at the same time, I think it's really good matchmaking. Bruno Silva versus Chris Weidman. Ugh. Then you have Nursultan Ruziboev versus Cedric Dumas. That's a weird fight, but it's middleweight. It's what it is. Bill Algeo, Kyle Nelson. That's a good fight. I'm looking forward to that. I am torn between excitement and dread for the welterweight debut of Chidi Njokuani against Reese McKee. Nate Lander versus Jamal Emmers gets 2 thumbs up. Verna Jandiroba versus Lupita Godinez. This is the second time I have done that. Last episode, when I was talking about this fight, I said Lucy, thinking of Lucy Pudilova instead of Lupi Godinez. What am I doing? Anyways, it's a bit of a flat matchup, but it makes a lot of sense based on where they are in the division. Julio Arce, I'm a big fan. He's fighting Herbert Burns. Connor Matthews versus Denis Bajukka. That can... Ebo Aslan versus Anton Turkalj. That can go away. Melissa Gatto versus Victoria Dudikova. That can go away, but this is the bottom of the card, is what it is. Andre Petroski, Jacob Malkoun. Really weird spot. Not sure why this is second fight of the night. It has stakes. It has top 25-ish implications. And I don't know. Kind of feels like it should be on the main card, honestly. Or at least above the Gatto-Dudikova fight, above Aslan versus Turkalj, Matthews and Bajukka. Probably above Arce and Burns, even though I really like that fight. Probably above that even. And even the Jandiroba versus Godinez fight not being on the main card is pretty weird. And then you have the opener, Angel Pacheco versus Calvin Logren, who... We'll talk about that when I get there. We'll talk about that when I get there. We'll put it that way, because I'm not exactly thrilled. So Aaron Blanchfield versus Fiorot at the top of the card. This is a fight that I'm going to stipulate right off the bat. I am cheering for Blanchfield. I find her style way more fun to watch. She combines kind of all the martial art aspects, the mixed martial arts. She mixes the martial arts. Yes, I understand she's a top grappler predominantly. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea. I know that is, in many ways, the most boring aspect of fighting to a lot of people. But I like what she does on top. It's not just control. It's punishing. It's pressure. It's crushing. It's taking submission opportunities. It's good ground and pound. And on the feet, she's getting better and better and better at being pretty creative, pretty dynamic, without being completely structureless. You see this with some grapplers where they develop a style that just kind of breaks down if you apply a little bit of pressure and a little bit of fundamentals to it. Hers doesn't really do that. She has an insane reach. Despite only being 5'4", she has a 68-inch reach. She can reach out, and she's working on a nice stabbing jab, stabbing right hand as well. 1-2s, pressure it up. And the footwork is better than you would expect it to be. And that's the thing, is that every time out, she's taken this step up with the stand-up, with the striking aspects of her game. And I'm very intrigued to see what she can do here. Whereas Fiorot came in as this really prepared, dare I say, Holly Holm 2.0, but French version, where she's very strong. She has a good clinch game. She can disengage from the clinch when she needs to. She will keep the range. She has a forbidding range, although not really. Apparently, it's only a 6'6" reach. So it's a bit weird that feels like that always is kind of part of her fights, except for the Caitlin Shukagian, now Caitlin Sermonara fight, because that was about the only time when she fought somebody who was effectively more rangy than she was, and actually made her a little bit uncomfortable at points. At points, she was able to, win, but there were moments where at least she had to go deeper into her bag of tricks. And that's the thing, is that there's always this hint that Fiorot has more to bring to the table, that she can go deeper, she could find a different gear, a different page in the textbook, but she really just kind of fights like the Holly Holm type. Or I'm trying to think of another person who like fights this style, but like it's common in women's MMA. And this fight kind of, I feel like, goes one of two ways. Either Blanchfield can bring pressure and kind of make Fiorot give ground while landing her stepping jab, picking up the pace, varying up her targets, and just making her feel uncomfortable with the wrestling. Like, because even if the wrestling doesn't succeed, even if the takedown game doesn't work from the clinch, she can do the sort of Corey Sandhagen versus Yadong Song thing. I was watching that fight recently again. A lot of other fighters have done this, where they use the takedowns to make the opponent feel really, really, really uncomfortable about what they're doing. Like, very, very uncomfortable about how things are going. Disrupt the rhythm, make the fight distinctly not their tune, not their tempo. Although not necessarily tempo, because Fiorot, I think, could actually fight at a really, really high tempo. She just likes to have that feeling of control, and like the pressure of Blanchfield probably will disrupt that to a certain degree. And that's a form of the fight that, like, I think she'll win. I think she'll have big moments throughout the fight because Blanchfield is very, very dynamic, both as a grappler and as a striker, surprisingly so. And she'll have moments where she kind of hurts Fiorot, maybe gets her to the ground. I think we will definitely see some takedowns, puts her on her back, and gets some things done. Like, has dominant moments. Whereas Fiorot will win the mid-range to the long-range striking exchanges. I think that's undoubtable. But she never really stamps her authority on the fight in a way that can't be taken from her. And I think Blanchfield could do that. It's also a bit weird that, like, people are calling for Fiorot to finish her here, and I just think you guys haven't been watching Meta and Fiorot fights. Like, you have an idea of what they are. Like, she went to decision with Thug Rose. She went to decision with Sermonara. She went to decision with Jennifer Maia. She went to decision with Mayra Buena Silva. She TKO'd Tabitha Ricci, who is like an atomweight. And then the knockout of Victoria Leonardo. And then we're back on the regional scene against, I guess, Gabriela Campo has a decent record. And so does Amanda Lino. Do I recognize these two ladies, like, at all? Yeah, Lino stopped fighting after she lost to Fiorot. So that seems like a dead end. Campo kept fighting. He's actually 12-3. I'm not familiar. She's not ringing a bell, but at least she is, like, she is routinely fighting, and I do appreciate that. Surprised she hasn't gotten signed, actually. Just given how the UFC is, like, at least to like a contender series fight or something. How the UFC has been looking for like anybody with a decent record to put on contender series. But anyways, it's just it would be very, very surprising if Fiorot actually was able to just nuke Blanchfield in the manner that people are suggesting that she might be able to do. So I could definitely see Blanchfield or Fiorot winning a fight where she stops the takedown, disengages in the clinch if it's a problem, or weaponizes the clinch herself and makes this into a long range to medium range, like bing, 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 just a volume fest. The sort of thing where, like, we get to the end of the fight and it's been pretty active and there's a lot of strikes landed, but it feels a lot like her fight with Caitlin Sermonara. Or Blanchfield can make some things happen and actually make this a bit messy and a bit chaotic and get the job done. Not necessarily by finish, because I don't think Blanchfield is some amazing finisher. She's a hard hitter, but she's not a finisher. And her submission game, it's definitely there. Like, obviously, she's done some good things. I mean, the run that Blanchfield is on here is incredibly impressive. Finishing Jessica Andrade, obviously very impressive. Molly McCann, JJ Aldridge. But, like, you look at the more physical aspects outside of Andrade. Tyler Santos went the distance with her. Miranda Maverick went the distance with her. Sarah Alpar went the different distance with her. Brogan Walker went the distance with her, which is like, that's kind of problematic. And then, of course, she had a great fight with Tracy Cortez in Invicta, which I would really, really recommend checking out. But I am going to go with Blanchfield at the end of the day, even though I can very easily see how she loses this fight. I'm going to go with her by decision. I'm going to go with her to be a little bit more creative and the person who will have the big moments and more options. And plus, if she gets a takedown of Fiorot, I don't really get the feeling that Fiorot is that good at getting back up or scrambling. I don't get that vibe. We obviously haven't, and we haven't seen it really tested. I think she's been taken down one time in her entire UFC career, and not many people will try to take her down. She denies the range in which it's comfortable to shoot from as a general rule. That's how she gets around this. But I think Blanchfield is the one to perhaps test that a little bit. So Blanchfield, by decision, she's the favorite, minus 185 to minus 194. Fiorot plus 148 to plus 160. Now is as good a time as any to remind people. I'm going to talk about the betting odds because I think, number one, it gives a perception of what the fandom is thinking, what the betting community, anyways, is thinking, and therefore, to a certain degree, where the winds are blowing. And number two, I do bet on the fights. But number three, I really don't necessarily recommend it. Only bet what you can lose, I guess, is the underlying statement I have as far as fight betting is concerned. So let's move on to Vicente Luque versus Joaquin Buckley. This fight is a tad depressing just because Vicente Luque, I cannot shake the idea that after the medical complications of the Jeff Neal fight, should not be fighting anymore. Like when we're talking about brain bleed, and I know some people have stepped up and stated that like it's not that big of a deal, and I will belt him. I am not a medical professional. Everything I know about medicine is basically like following sports injuries and then like my own history of injuries and like people I know. So like I know a fair amount about like knee injuries because that's a problem I've been through. I know a fair enough amount about back injuries because that's a problem I've been through. But admittedly, I don't know a lot about that, like brain bleeds and that kind of thing. So like if he's cleared, he's cleared. And there's people who have stated that like he's fine to go. He's good to go. They people of some level of medical background are okay with it. But I cannot shake it in the back of my head that like this feels like something you shouldn't be fighting after. He's also not looked super great for a while. Like we're talking about maybe like 2021 against Michael Chiesa or even back to 2020 because like the win over RDA was just like what happens when RDA runs into someone bigger than him who's just good enough in the clinch not to get like toppled over, and like that was the fight over and over and over and over again. But on the good side of this, Luque still seems to be in his prime, relatively speaking. He is 32 years old. He still moves reasonably quickly. He doesn't crumble at the first sign of trouble. Like it's not like he's super undurable, despite the results of the Neal fight. And he's a really, really exciting, fun, technical brawler who is way deeper technically than you'd expect it to be with how messy his striking can get. His defense is not as good as it should be for a guy who's been in the sport for as long as he has. And of course, he does have a very dynamic submission game from the front headlock position. I mean, dude's got 4 Darce chokes in the UFC. Is that a record? I don't know, but I kind of think it does. I kind of think it might be. I Googled it. They didn't have the answer. Very easily applied, but it seems like a lot. He's beaten some of the best guys that you can come across, and like all of his losses are to absolutely top-notch dudes. Let's see here. The 9-man list is Jeff Neal, Bilal Muhammad, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Leon Edwards. Okay, admittedly, Mike Graves is not great. I will sort of take that back. And then there was like some trouble early on in his career, basically. But he battled back. He had that 4-fight winning streak over Hader Hassan, Alvaro Herrera, Hector Urbina, and Bilal Muhammad, ironically. Ran into Leon Edwards. And then had his, I think, like one of the most legendary runs you're ever going to see where he beat Nico Price, Chad LaPrice, Jalen Turner, Brian Barberena, Derek Krantz, and Mike Perry. I know some of those guys are not big names. Some of those guys are not even very good. But those fights were amazingly fun to watch. And they kind of made him an all-time favorite. Lost to Wonderboy and then beat Nico Price. Beat Randy Brown, beat Tyron Woodley, beat Michael Chiesa, like I said. So I don't know why they did 2 fights against Nico Price. I guess that's the one thing I don't really understand about his record. And then against him, he's got Joaquin Buckley, who is the owner of perhaps the coolest knockout you're ever going to see in the UFC. That knockout of Impa Kasanganay is fantastic. It is phenomenal. And Joaquin Buckley has every physical attribute that you could really ask for. He's fast, he's explosive, he's powerful. He seems actually pretty durable. Despite the fact that he is packed on little ball of muscle, he seems to actually have a pretty good cardio gas tank. And at 170, he's quite big and strong and powerful. And I think it's going to be a really good thing. But at the same time, if Vicente Luque is still Vicente Luque, as in he is still functional, can take a little bit of damage, still has a little bit of speed, still has a little bit of knack for timing and counters and danger to him, this does feel like a fight that Joaquin Buckley loses. Because Joaquin Buckley's problem is I splooged all over the physical attributes of this man, but the fight IQ is bad. And he's also very, very much a bully fighter. He really expects, I don't want to say needs, but he expects people to crumble before him. And if they don't, things get a little bit messy because he'll do the same things kind of over and over again. There's a predictability. There's a lack of problem solving to his game. And recently there's also been a heavier lean on his wrestling that I think goes into a place that he's not necessarily great at because he doesn't really do much on the ground, number one. And number two, I think he makes some very, very basic grappling mistakes. So what I could see here is that Buckley comes out and has some early success because he is the powerhouse. He is the explosive guy. He is the fast guy. Comes out and he does successfully bully Vicente Luque for a time. But Luque's ability to find counter strikes, turn up the heat, eventually forces him into like an uncomfortable place. Like where he's having flashbacks to all those times that someone hasn't just combusted in front of him. And he gets a little bit sloppy with the grappling, shoots for a takedown, ends up in a Darce choke. That's what I'm calling. I'm calling Vicente Luque by a Darce choke for the 5th time. There you go. I have a ton of questions about the fight, honestly. I could easily see Buckley just absolutely crushing him. But I'm just hoping it's going to be a really, really good co-main event. Luque is the minus 115 to minus 122 favorite. I was a little surprised by that. And Buckley plus 100 to minus 105. I think that was the most surprising favorite on the card, to be honest. Maybe Jamal Emmers, who we'll talk about later. Bruno Silva versus Chris Weidman. This is depressing as all hell. Number one, this is two guys who are 1-4 in their last 5, and they're fighting on a main card of a travel card. It's a little bit sad. Weidman's 39 years old. He had the big leg break. He hasn't looked functional since about 2020. 2020, yeah, just 2020. And if he wins this fight, it's Mark Coleman, Stephan Bonner all over again, or it's, well, USADA's not a thing anymore, and Chris Weidman is doped to the absolute gills. Like, those honestly feel like the only two options. Bruno Silva, well being 1-4 in his last 5, has lost to, generally speaking, very good fighters, even though I'm not a huge fan of Shara Bullet, and I don't think he's a great fighter. I don't think he's a future champion like some people do, but losing to him is still not that big of a deal. Losing to GM3 is not a huge issue by guillotine. Getting RNC by Brendan Allen, these are fine. Essentially, the problem here is just that Silva is a reasonably good athlete. He is a reasonably powerful fighter, and he still is relatively there. And I just kind of have to think that, if you don't need takedowns on Chris Weidman to beat him, and you could stop a takedown, and Chris Weidman's wrestling has gone to absolute pot, you will beat Chris Weidman. So, Silva by TKO. Prepare to be sad. I don't know. Silva's a minus 238 to minus 290 favorite. Weidman plus 195 to plus 225. I'd say that's too narrow, but I don't want to bet on this fight. I just don't. Nursultan Ruziboev versus Cedric Dumas. This is just a stupid fight. And I don't mean it in a bad way. Like, people think when I say stupid fight, I mean bad things. No, I just mean that, you look at both of these guys, they're huge physical monsters, bullies for the division, and there's just there's a lack of actual structure to them. Because Ruziboev, I'm not going to say he's not technical, but it's like he's got all these grab bag of tricks that probably won't really work. I was looking through his record and I'm like, this guy has 8 Kimura victories. That's a little worrisome. because the Kimura is not a submission that you generally see a lot of. And then you got a bunch of arm bars and like some slam knockouts and stuff. And it's like, this guy's just really, and I haven't seen a lot of these fights, obviously. Like, a lot of them are just not really accessible. But there is just a general problem here that this guy is just too grab bag, even though he is a reasonable technician when you watch him. He's used to beating guys who, like, in manners and in ways and in forms that just shouldn't work in the UFC. And that is realistically the big concern there. And then with Dumas, you have a fantastic athlete. And I'm going to ignore the whole, like, domestic violence stuff behind him and, like, battery, assault and battery and stuff. I'm going to ignore that because even as a fighter, I just don't like it. He's just kind of a bully. And at the end of the day, very, very, very messy. Like, he is the highest level of the sort of guy who could get Kimura by Nursultan Ruziboev. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is the highest level that this could work because, well, Dumas is a far better athlete than the guys he's done it in, that Ruziboev has beaten. He's actually not really at all better on a technical level. Like, it's just a mess. Like, we are talking about a guy who lost to Josh Fremd, for example. That's just not UFC level. I know he's 9-1. I know he's picked up a couple of wins in the UFC, but like, it's against Abu Azaitar. Do yourself a favor and never watch that fight. And Cody Brundrich, and do yourself a favor and never watch that fight because they're terrible. They're insanely bad. So I am going to go with Ruziboev to pull off like a submission or a TKO of some variety here and just kind of like feast on the chaos and the sloppiness that is Cedric Dumas. That's why I'm going to go. Cedricus Dumas. Pardon me. Ruziboev is a minus 218 to minus 278 favorite. Dumas is plus 180 to plus 220. I guess I'm a little surprised about that one. There's still a lot of people who are like very, very hyped on Dumas. And I get why. He is a good athlete, and he is big. 6'2", 79-inch reach at middleweight is pretty large. I just don't think he's that good. Bill Algeo versus Kyle Nelson. Full disclosure here, I still will never fully shake like the problem with Kyle Nelson. Here we go. I think I finally have words to put this in. My notes do not have these words, but I think I have it. The problem with Kyle Nelson is I saw him fight so early on in his career, and for a long time, and watched him be this kind of easy to get tired power fighter who, realistically speaking, just was not comfortable when the pace got turned up, was not comfortable when there was any kind of chaoticness, was not comfortable when the opponent was able to not necessarily out-bully him, but like was uncomfortable when a guy would not accept being bullied. And his early UFC run was still that guy. And he's been less that guy lately, but I can't shake in my brain that the vestiges of that guy are still there. There you go. And that's why I'm picking at Bill Algeo, because Kyle Nelson is a better athlete than Bill Algeo. He's a more powerful athlete. He's a stronger fighter. He's a faster fighter. But Bill Algeo is a guy who will bring the chaos to you. He will bring the fight to you. He will do a lot of the things that Billy Quarantillo did to Kyle Nelson. That's why I want to see Billy Quarantillo and Bill Algeo fight so badly. And, you know, Bill Algeo is himself quite dangerous. Like I said, Nelson was the more powerful fighter, but yeah, so is Algeo. And Algeo can find submissions and do some things. And he's also 6 foot, 73 inches reach. Nelson came down to 145 so that he would be the taller, longer, more imposing at range fighter. And Algeo actually kind of takes that away from him by being, you know, an inch taller and 2 inches longer. And you cannot out-scramble Algeo, realistically speaking. Like, that just does not really happen. And another thing is Nelson is very textbook, quite predictable. Like, it is good to be a textbook striker. It is good to learn the textbook. But when every solution you have is kind of like the first thing in the textbook, and you're going to use it repetitively, it's going to start to lead to some problems where someone like Algeo, who is a surprisingly deep striker, surprisingly deep technician, is going to start to just kind of light you up. And that's why I've got Algeo by decision. I wouldn't be surprised if he hits a late submission or a late TKO. Like, both of those are on the table. He is the favorite at minus 235 to minus 250. Nelson's plus 190 to plus 195. So, yep, going with Bill Algeo, and it seems like that's not an unpopular pick. Chidi and Jaquani versus Reese McKee. This is a two true outcome fight. At 35 years old, Chidi is coming down to 170. I should have looked this up, but has he done 170 before? I kind of feel like he has at some point in his 30. There it is. Yep. Okay, he did catchweight in Bellator against Andrei Koreshkov and against Melvin Gillard. Okay, here's a welterweight fight against Thiago Goncalves in Bellator. Okay, so he's done the 170 thing before. So he's coming down to 170 again. He's returning to the weight class. And he is a massive man for the weight class. Now, if the cut goes well and he feels good about himself and he comes out and he just like absolutely big brothers Reese McKee on the table, 100%. He's a phenomenal athlete, dangerous clinch striker, powerful striker, and probably a more willing wrestler than he should be, but Reese McKee's not really a wrestler, so I don't think that's really a problem. This is a guy who, was very, very close to, just absolutely melting Gregory Rodriguez, for example, and then it didn't happen. So he's going to go out there. He's probably going to give Reese McKee a really, really hard time. And then really the question basically becomes, does Reese McKee just survive it and take over late? Because Chidi's had, cardio issues and, issues with long-term decision-making in fights pretty much throughout his entire career. It's why he has so many losses despite being this really good athlete for the division. And does he lose that way? Or does he just finish Reese McKee? And that feels like the two true outcome fight here. So I'm going to go with Njokuani by TKO. He's a minus 135 to minus 156 favorite. McKee's plus 115 to plus 122. It's a weird fight in terms of the odds because those odds feel completely fair. But I also think that the fight's going to look nothing like a fight with those odds. It's just that it can go both ways of being way, way steeper without really any real imagination. Nate Landwehr versus Jamal Emmers. This is another full disclosure fight because I really, really like Emmers. I overrate him watching tape all the time. I keep picking him in fights that he doesn't necessarily win. And then Nate Landwehr is kind of like the opposite. He's the guy that has achieved far more than my brain conceives. This guy beat David Onama. That's just weird to me. And then it was a great comeback fight and whatever. And then the Ludovic Klein fight is also aged really, really well. So when I pick Emmers, and I am, keep that in mind. I do like Emmers to win the fight because I do like his wrestle boxing style to be sound. It's less dangerous. It's less creative. It's more bare bones than Landwehr. But it is defensively sound. And it does bring a lot of volume and control. Something Landwehr doesn't really do. Volume, yes, but control, not really. Landwehr is that more sloppy guy, but he has awkward angles with mean intentions, and he'll catch you with shots that you don't see coming. He'll also bring a lot more power. I don't think it's that he's necessarily a bigger hitter than the guys he fights. It's just that he throws his whole body into that. You ever seen the Boys episode where they beat up Stormfront. The girls beat up Stormfront. And there's that one punch that Kimiko hits her with where it's the whole goddamn body is in that punch. That is Nate Landwehr's punching. So I'm going with Emmers by decision just to be the more sound defensive guy and to have the control, the volume aspects of the game. But he did miss weight last time, so there's a little bit of concern there. And Landwehr's dangerous. Never count him out. Emmers is minus 190 to minus 225. Landwehr is plus 160 to plus 185. And then we have Lupita Godinez versus Verna Jandiroba. I'm not going to talk a lot about this fight because it makes a lot of sense for the rankings. I want to make that clear again. It's two ladies who I have a lot of immense respect for, but it's just not a stylistic matchup that's all that interesting. Lupita Godinez has finally gotten to the point where she doesn't have to take down people to actually be effective. She can just stop takedowns. Just throw volume boxing and do her thing. And Jandiroba's stand-up is quite bad. There's some interesting little power things to it and whatever. But at the end of the day, she's a girl who requires top control and takedowns to realistically win. or she requires people who are really, 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 really bad strikers to be on the opposite end of the exchanges. So I just see Jandiroba not really being able to get takedowns and just getting outpointed on the feet. Godinez is a minus 200 to minus 218 favorite. Jandiroba is plus 162 to plus 180. You could go wider. Julio Arce versus Herbert Burns. Again, I feel like I need to go with the full disclosure here. But I don't actually think it's affecting my pick. And also, Arce is a major favorite on this card. Arce is another one of those guys I tend to pick when he's not going to win. Like I tend to overrate in the review, kind of like a Jamal Emmers, where I'm like, this is a really good style. I like the outside striking he brings. I like the speed. I like the volume. I like the variety. I like the defensive acumen. Like, it's all very, very good. And then, unfortunately, he gets in there and just something happens that doesn't work out well. And that's kind of it. But he's not in there with like a stud athlete like Montel Jackson or Yadong Song or Shaman Rice even. He's not in there against somebody who is going to be a big grappler. Well, pardon me, Herbert Burns is, but like a big takedown threat. Herbert Burns is like is an athletic jiu-jitsu guy. The takedowns are not amazing. They're not stunning. Arce is very hard to out-grapple, very hard to out-scramble, very hard to take down, very hard to control. And aside from a very random loss to Hakeem Dawodu, all of his losses make a lot of sense. And then with Burns, there's also the fact that he did, in fact, get finished due to exhaustion-related offense by Daniel Pineda. And he has, it was the Bill Algeo fight, wasn't it? And then he also got, finished by Daniel Pineda as well. But I don't think his durability is great. His stand-up is not particularly amazing. He kind of fights a lot like Gilbert Burns in that regard, where they kind of make up their mind that there's a couple of things that they want to do, and they're going to show you that repetitively. And they have the physicality that it's like, it's dangerous, don't get me wrong. This is a guy who did knock out Nate Landwehr, but at the same time, it's going to get kind of repetitive, and it tends not to be necessarily the most defensively sound thing in the world, so you kind of get lit up. And Arce is actually a really good striker. He's like very, very underrated. Mostly because he's had a hard time like making weight at 135, which really should be his division. And up at 145, he's a little bit small. Only a 70-inch reach, for example. 5'7". But yeah, I still got to go with Arce to TKO Burns here. But we'll see. It should be a fun little fight. Arce is a minus 395 to minus 440 favorite. Burns the plus 300 to plus 320 underdog. Is he the biggest favorite on this card? I think the answer is bizarrely yes. That the biggest favorite on this card is Julio Arce. That is stunning to me. Connor Matthews versus Denis Brzezicka. This is a Dana White Contender Series fight. Brzezicka is fine. He is a above average athlete. In most ways, he's training at Serra-Longo, which is a really, really good gym. There's good things to work with him and turn him into something reasonably good. Please change your nickname because Dennis the Great is wrong. You got to go with... Your name is Dennis and your last name is Brzezicka. My dude, you just got to go with the Bazooka or the Menace or something along those lines. I'm sorry. The nickname has been chosen for you. And there's not much else to say about him. He's a fundamentally fine, but like completely unexciting fighter. There's nothing he does that is super cool. There's no wrinkle to the game that he has that is dope. He's just fine. And I don't want to say that that's bad, but it's not that interesting. And then Connor Matthews is just not a good enough athlete. You look at his like pre-UFC like record and so on, it's like a win over Jay Ellis, the 100 lost man. And there's a guy who's 1-8 on there and a guy who's 0-7. He's only got 7 wins. He's got like one decent win. I like Andrew Cruz is fine. Like I've watched Andrew Cruz fight, but like he's also a bad athlete. And the guy he fought on Dana White Contender Series had him in all kinds of trouble at various points. And if he just didn't gas out, he probably would have won. Frankly, like he would get tired and then like he would also overchase. Like he would hurt Matthews and then face check right into something stupid. Like it was a fight that was all about Farias, I think was his name, and his flaws and nothing about like what Matthews actually can bring to a fight to make it good. That's not to say that there is anything. Like, he's a pretty decent grappler. I actually like him. Like, I get a good vibe off of him. I think it was on Dana White's Looking for a Fight when I first got exposed to him. It might have actually been the Andrew Cruz fight, but he goes to watch Connor Matthews fight, and we get the interview with him and everything. It feels good, but he's just not athletic enough. He's just not. And the problem is that the things that you could usually make up for non-athleticness for, guys like GM3 and stuff will display this. There's nothing there. It's not that he fights with a super high-end athletic game or anything. It's not that. But it's that, realistically speaking, he fights in a manner that is for somebody who is not necessarily a great athlete, but a guy who has some athletic edges to actually apply. And he just doesn't have them. Like, he can strike, he can grapple. He I guess in a nutshell, he is Bajutska, maybe a little bit more interesting on a technical level, but like without any physical gifts really to bring to the table. So yeah, I'm taking Bajutska by decision, even though he's 0-2 in the UFC. He's a minus 120 to minus 130 underdog or favorite, and Matthews is plus 100 to plus 110. Ibu Aslan versus Anton Turkalj, a rematch nobody asked for. If you've never seen the fight between these two in Brave CF, it was basically Turkalj getting his butt kicked until they got into a really, 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 really chaotic scramble where he ended up getting the back and got a rear naked choke. I don't know. Like, Aslan should have won the fight the first time. He's probably going to win the fight this time. He's got good low kicks. He's got some powerful striking game. He can grapple, despite the fact that he got rear naked choked by Anton Turkalj. He's a reasonably good athlete and a reasonably good addition to the 205 roster. He's got good size, 6'3", 77.5-inch reach. Dude is kind of like got all the physical things. I do want to see some things get like better. Like, he has an idea of a jab, but I like that jab to get better. He has basic defense, but it exists. I'd like to see him get a little bit deeper there. He will vary up his timing, his entries a little bit, and has some generally good striking ideas. I will take him to mess up Turkalj and just not get tapped this time. TKO by Aslan. He is a minus 125 to minus 135 favorite. Turkalj plus 102 to plus 110. Melissa Gatto versus Victoria Dudikova. Not really all that interested in this fight, and that's saying something because I do actually relatively like Melissa Gatto as a fighter. She's very, very powerful. Her wrestling instincts are not necessarily the best, but she's very, very strong, and that does make her hard to out wrestle. Like, you look at her takedown numbers, it's not that bad considering some of the decisions she'll make, and just like, conceding an underhook when she shouldn't do it, and getting into problems with clinch. The Tracy Cortez fight is a great example of this. I can't pick Dudikova to win. Dudikova's coming up a weight class to 125. She's got a very control and power-based game, heavily on the clinch, and really particularly bad stand-up. She also fought with staff, which, like, really gross staff, like, in the region. Anyways, Gatto by decision just be like the rude awakening of like, this is what physical power feels like. I am actually strong. You were just someone who was cutting a lot of weight to make 115 and you were just big. Gatto is the minus 155 favorite to minus 166 and plus 125 to plus 140 to Dudikova. That could be wider. I'll be betting on Gatto. And then the last fight I have any interest in is Andre Petroski versus Jacob Malkoun. Granted, there's only one fight before this. It's a weird placement on the card because, like I said, these guys are like, top 20, top 30 guys in the division. And there's a lot of like fights that are just kind of absolute filler above it. It's a bit weird. Like, Jacob Malkoun had a competitive fight with a main eventing fighter, Apex main eventer, but still, Brendan Allen. Petroski fought GM3 and won, so I have no idea why it's this low. It's just very, very weird. It is a two true outcome fight. Malkoun works behind a jab pretty well. He puts up a high pace, and he'll go for takedowns. He's got a pretty good single leg, and will change into a double leg at times. He does a very, very good job of getting on top, scrambling, and like top control game. Not a great finisher by any means. And then Petroski is actually a pretty good grappler. He's got a power striking game. It's not very good, but he will crack people. And then he kind of phases time goes on because he doesn't have great cardio. Malkoun, if he had like actual physicality, would be really, really good. But he's 5'9" at middleweight and not very athletic. I'm still gonna go with him by decision. He's kind of my spirit animal in that regard, and he is the favorite, surprisingly enough, at minus 215 to minus 250, and Petrosky at plus 164 to plus 200, which kind of ruins the fight a little bit for me because I was kind of expecting to be able to get Malkoun at like underdog odds and turn a nice little tidy profit, and I'm not going to. Angel Pacheco versus Callan Loughran. Listen, Loughran is a prohibitive favorite here, minus 325 to minus 375, and Pacheco's plus 255 to plus 285. I'm picking Pacheco just because he's the underdog. Don't get me wrong, I don't think either of these guys will be here very long. In Loughran's case, he's a control grappler who will ground and pound pretty heavily, but like isn't actually that big. Like he's a 5'6", 68-inch reach guy. Doesn't seem like a very good athlete, honestly. I know losing to Taylor Lapilus is a kind of weird experience because Lapilus himself is very, very weird. He's a very, very long, rangy guy who not a lot of people fight like, and Pacheco certainly does not. But I think it highlighted some, significant problems here. I just don't think he's that good. I think it shows in the fact that, 2 of his wins are over guys who have over 30 losses and no wins. And then there's another 3-5 guy there, 0-0, 1-0, 5-0, 10-3, Luke Shanks, who is just not a very good athlete. And then like Dylan Hazen is supposed to be pretty good. Like he was 9-0 going into the fight, but like, I don't think he is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Loughran's all that good. I don't think Pacheco's all that good, but like he's a reasonably decent little athlete. He's coming down from 145, so he'll probably be bigger. He has made 35 before, I think, so I'm not worried about him making the weight. And his loss to Danny Silva on the Contenders series actually is aging pretty well because Danny Silva looked quite good against Josh Kulabau. Like the fact that Pacheco put up a similar level of fight with Danny Silva that Josh Kulabau did actually says some really good things about him. But there is the old warning, don't overrate a guy in a loss because you never know what's going to, like, there are countless examples of guys who put up a really, really good fight in fights that I thought they were going to get rolled over in. And then it just turned out that like, it was just their night to like do something cool. But I don't know. I feel saucy. I feel spicy. I'm going to go against the second biggest favorite on the card because I just don't think Loughran's any good. I think people are falling for like the gift of gab from the Irish once again because there's always this like kind of weird Connor adjacency thing with the Irish fighters. I don't know. Anyways, that is the fight card. It is a pretty good one. Check out the links down below for my social media, for my Discord server, for my video game stuff if you happen to be a nerdy person like myself. And I will see you, well, not see you, but you will hear from me after the fights.